My colleague Shashank Mattu continues to be with us on the story. I'm also being joined by Irina Tuskaman, security affairs expert from Washington, D.C. Irina, to you first. What do you think about the entire exchange that took place? Do you think President Zelensky overplayed his hand with someone like Donald Trump?
I think President Zelensky, in good faith, believed that he was here to sign a minerals agreement, which would have advanced the relationship. But he also knew that the terms that he was willing to agree to in terms of the deal would have required some level of negotiation concerning security guarantees. Otherwise, the deal made no sense for Ukraine at all. It would have been a one-sided deal. In other words, it would have been an exploitation of Ukrainian resources. And President Trump knew fully well that Zelensky was coming in to discuss the terms of the deal, to discuss security guarantees, and to negotiate. What happened was clearly an ambush. It was clearly a coordinated ambush because I don't believe the administration had any intention at all to provide security guarantees. I think Zelensky would have walked away with nothing. So the question is, what was the point of this scripted and embarrassing spectacle? Embarrassment was actually the point. Trump's position was to humiliate Zelensky, to show to his base that he is confronting somebody that he villainized and already put out as painted as a dictator, and to show that Zelensky is not willing to accept his terms, that he's not being reasonable, and therefore there's nothing to negotiate about. I don't think that deal was ever meant to be signed. However, for Trump to be able to fully embrace the Russian narrative, he had to make a show of it, to show that he made a good faith effort with Zelensky. Zelensky was not willing to accept Trump's proposal, and therefore now he can fully and revert to Plan B, which is unilateral engagement with Russia.
Right, Irina, do you think this signals a sort of a crisis looming between the European members of the NATO and the United States?
I do think that the European Union is finally starting to wake up and realize that they cannot rely on this administration in terms of advancing and protecting their security interests. Now, that's not to say that they should be conflating President Trump and his political agenda with all of the United States. It doesn't mean that the European Union cannot cooperate with members of Congress, cannot cooperate with private companies inside the United States, with Americans who are willing to work with them. But this administration clearly has a completely different view of the situation, and the expectation should be that the European Union should be strengthening their own defense industry, and they should be also looking at the conflict beyond Ukraine, because for the past couple of decades, Russia has been aggressively attacking European countries and other Western countries, and not just Ukraine. There's been attempted assassination on UK soil. There's been cyber attacks against European countries. There's been organized terrorist attacks in France. There's been all sorts of militant, belligerent activity that is not going to be settled by forcing Ukraine to accept an unnecessary and humiliating defeat and handing Russia another military victory while they're actually losing. They're losing because they cannot produce the weapons that they need, and they're forced to rely on North Korean exports, on donkeys, and on waves of human waves to hold off eventual and unavoidable defeat. Ukraine, on the other hand, is in a much stronger position today than it was 3 years ago. So the comments about Ukraine not having any cards to play were simply factually baseless and false.
Absolutely. Irina, do stay with us. I'm also going to bring in my colleague Shashank Mattu to know his perspective. Shashank, how do you think European leaders will be viewing this entire exchange with Donald Trump and J.D. Vance doubling down on Zelensky? We've seen that quite a few leaders have been lending support to Ukraine, including Germany and France.
And it's not just Germany and France. It's a number of leaders across Europe that have come out and expressed solidarity with Zelensky. We have the European Union's High Representative for Foreign Policy, basically the EU's foreign minister, come out and say that the free world now needs a new leader, basically acknowledging that the Trump administration is not acknowledged by Europe as a leader of the free world, that fundamentally there is a rupture between Europe and how the Trump administration sees the world. And this is an extremely serious statement to make, because the Europeans are saying that, look, if you are not going to respect our interests on the biggest land war in Europe since the end of the Second World War, then what really is there of this US NATO US European alliance? What you're seeing really in the last couple of weeks, if you have been looking at some of the reporting coming out of Europe and some of the conversation that its strategic elites have been having, all of those conversations are about, can we really trust the United States anymore? Can we really trust their security guarantee? You had the new Chancellor of Germany come in, and the incoming Chancellor come in and say that we cannot rely on America anymore, that NATO itself, this military alliance that has stood the test of time for 75 years, may be dead in a little while. So these are really apocalyptic statements to be making, but it shows the level of uncertainty that exists in Europe right now about the Trump administration and whether the Trump administration will stand up for European interests. So it is really a historic moment in that sense.
Absolutely, Shashank. I'm going to go back to my guest, Irina. Irina, what do you think? Do you think European allies can support Ukraine without any kind of US military backing?
I think they're about to announce a huge military and financial package in support of Ukraine. Ukraine has already been at the forefront of developing its own groundbreaking weapons, and Ukraine has already occupied territory in Russia for the last 6 months, so it has leverage to negotiate its own terms independently of the US. US actually has very little leverage over Ukraine at this point in time. Ukraine has received significant amount of weapons, enough to hold itself off. To achieve a groundbreaking victory, it will need more, but I think Europeans are gearing up to ramp up their own capacity and their own production, because they understand that Ukraine is a red line and it's an existential issue, not just for Ukrainians who have been bravely fighting for their existence for the past 3 years, but for themselves. The bigger question, however, is whether US can sustain its alliances beyond Russia and occasional transactions with everyone else. Will US sustain a self-isolation by being so non-committal and by being perceived as abandoning allies in need? And moreover, will US revert to its alliances? Will it replicate this experience with Taiwan, with Israel, and with any other ally that faces the prospects of encirclement by more numerous or stronger or bigger countries? Those are questions that I think this administration should take very seriously. I think it's also wise for everyone involved to consider that being bigger and more numerous is not a guarantee of victory, just as being smaller and less populous is not a guarantee of defeat. Agility matters, resilience matters, morale matters, ability to innovate and evolve certainly matters, and the ability to outsmart your enemy and to utilize all possible methods effectively also matter, and not just pure military power, pure human numbers in battle.
Absolutely, Irina. Thank you for bringing in that perspective. You as well, Shashank.